This is a sportsy media production, part of Quiet Loud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Raw, Authentic, and Vulnerable podcast here. My name is Jacob Newton. I've got a powerful guest coming on. I'm not going to mention his name. I'll let him do that. But before we always get started, as always, want to thank everybody at Sportsepreneur for creating this platform for me to continue coming on, sharing my story, bringing guests on to share their story so that I think we get so lost in our differences. We always want to highlight how different I am from the next person. But I know that the more we're willing to talk, I think we can find so many more commonalities. And again, this podcast is all about getting people to recognize and understand that we all struggle. It's not just 1 in 5, it's 5 in 5. We all have, we all will continue. Life is beautiful, but it is also very challenging. So with that being said, I've got a former teammate's brother on here today. Maybe we met one time in person in Frisco, Texas at some tryouts. He is a former hockey player himself. Maybe he'll dabble in some hockey, but his story is going to be one that is very powerful, very eye-opening. And so with that, I will hand it over to today's guest. Take it away, brother.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here. My name's Sam Goodwin, and I'm originally from and grew up in St. Louis, and I call St. Louis home. But yeah, Jake, I think you and I tried out for the same junior team, which I am doing the calculations, and 2007 was 17 years ago, which just seems like it can't really be the case. But it's been great to kind of stay in touch virtually over the past couple decades now, and really happy to be here chatting today.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you had invited me to some tournament, and I believe it was in Abu Dhabi. Maybe this was 3 years ago in the heat of COVID, and it would have been around Christmas time. And I was thinking, well, shoot, if I leave and something happens, I get stuck somewhere. I won't be able to be with my kids. So ultimately, I turned down that invitation. But thank you for throwing that my way nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. And from a little bit of my journey, so from 2010 to 2020, most of that time I spent living and working overseas. But I actually traveled to every country in the world, which was a fantastic journey. But interestingly, hockey was a big part of that journey in places that I never really would have expected, including Abu Dhabi, for example. And it was always a really fantastic experience to be able to use hockey to build a cultural bridge with people all around the world in a way that I never would have expected. And so I sometimes find myself communicating to young players today that the game can open doors, can provide opportunities, can allow for networking opportunities in ways that I never expected, as long as we're open to those and continue to pursue them. And this invitation that I came to you with a couple years ago was kind of a result of that. And being able to play hockey around the world has been a big part of my journey over the past decade or so.
Yeah, man. That's one thing I try and get the younger generation, or even guys that are, maybe in their first couple years of playing professionally or in college. Play the game for as long as you possibly can, because the opportunities that will present themselves, even if you didn't get to the pro level, even if you were just a collegiate athlete, there's so many job opportunities out there where they are going at and trying to attract athletes. So again, real life, quote unquote, real life will always be there. But the doors that will open for you, the longer you stay in the game is undeniable.
100%. And I'll tell you a quick story. So in 2012, I had an opportunity to move to Singapore for a job with a tech startup business. And I'll never forget, in my first week, I was on my lunch break and I walked into a mall in Singapore, and I went up to the second floor, third floor, and there was a rink there. And I remember just walking around the area and asking a couple people, like, literally, I think I asked, is there hockey here? Because in my entire life, I had never played with anyone from Singapore. It was 80 miles north of the equator. It was about as far from, hockey as I thought it could be. But turns out there was a league, and it's comprised of a lot of expats from the United States and Canada and Europe. And I spent the next 6 years living and working in Singapore, but probably the best way that I met people and networked, both personally and professionally, was through the hockey community in Asia, which was potentially the most counterintuitive thing that I could have imagined, but just speaks again to your point about the game paying dividends way beyond my career, my traditional playing career, which I finished in college. So if any young hockey players are listening, just know that there can be a lot of opportunities beyond what you might be imagining.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so many players, especially younger players, they get lost in, these stories created around where they can go with the sports. And because they think, oh, well, I can't reach the NHL. Okay, so I should just stop. I mean, what am I really playing for? But again, it's so much bigger than the sport. It's so much bigger than, reaching your goals and getting to the destination. And I think through that, we've lost sight of the journey. And again, the different pathways that are in time going to present themselves. They may not be presenting themselves right now, but again, taking a broader view, trying to view things from a broader lens, I think will get players into a better understanding of the fact that, again, sports, it's not just hockey, it's all sports, So again, stay in it for as long as you can. In regards to playing, is there any playing still left in your life, or is it just, kind of still using hockey to build on these connections and these different people that you get to meet?
I'm still playing every week, sometimes once or twice. So I live in DC and play with a group of guys there. And again, still using hockey as networking. A lot of them work for the government and intelligence or at the White House or in various fashions that way, and great contacts, very interesting people, so still using it as networking. And then sometimes I'm back in my hometown of St. Louis and I skate with the St. Louis Blues alumni, and they have a fantastic community of people. A lot of the former Blues have stuck around St. Louis and coached their kids and have been huge in developing the minor hockey scene in St. Louis. So between those two places and others as well, I'm still playing, and it continues to be something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been divorced now. It's obviously not going to be. We're not going to talk about divorce, but I was married to a woman that is from St. Louis, from Oakville, and
Yep.
she went to school with Patty Maroon and Ryan Kretzer, and so we lived there a couple different summers during my career, and so I got to meet so many of the St. Louis guys, and I played with Kyle Kramer, I played with Maroon and Kretzer. Lavecchio is such an incredible man. Obviously, I'm sure you know him, but
Yep. Just had a baby.
yeah, I know. I literally just sent him a voice note today to just
Yeah.
congratulate him. I know he's busy and he's not going to be sleeping a whole bunch in the foreseeable future, but no, I know a lot of the hockey people there in St. Louis, and I never really cared for the city. Maybe that had something to do with it was always summertime and the humidity there is no joke. And at that time, I didn't really get down with sweating in my normal clothes, but nonetheless, brother, I think I know a little bit about your story. And so I'm really, really eager to have you dive into it because I don't know it, obviously, like you know it and the experiences that you had while you were in a foreign country. And it sounds like you've done a lot of travel. But I know there was a situation, I don't remember, and I don't know how long ago this all is. But if maybe you could start diving into, what took place while you were overseas. I think it was in the Middle East, maybe Syria. So yeah, maybe you can start diving into that whole story, and then from there, I'll formulate some questions, and then we can really dive into your story for sure.
Yeah, sure. And I'll share a little bit about that now, and then we can dive in any way you think makes sense. But I'll mention I've written a book about this experience, and I've spent a few years actually writing the book, and it just went on sale last week. So it's been kind of an exciting time to put some of this out there. But as I was mentioning, from 2010 to 2020, in those 10 years, much of which I spent living and working overseas, I had a journey to travel to every country in the world, and I did do it. But like any worthwhile venture or endeavor in life, it wasn't without its challenges. And perhaps most notably, in the spring of 2019, when I went to Syria, which was country 181 of 193, I was taken hostage and accused of being an American spy and collaborating with terrorists. And nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And the Syrians held me for 9 weeks in some pretty uncomfortable situations. And thank God, thanks to a long list of people who worked tirelessly, the situation ended peacefully, and I was released on July 26th. And in the wake of that, I've really been reflecting on what happened and trying to put things into context and perspective, and pull out lessons and messages that I think can be helpful to others. And some of those are actually linked to the skills and traits that are developed from being a competitive athlete. But I never could have really expected where my life was going to go. But really reflecting on this experience and trying to use it to help others today is where a lot of my time is, including writing this book. So this is now 5 years ago in the summer of 2019. And I'm still reflecting, still speaking about it. And that's kind of the overview of what happened.
Yeah, for sure. And I know what you're doing now. I know you're doing a lot of public speaking, and I think you're speaking to, businesses, different corporations, and overcoming adversity, right? And obviously you yourself had to overcome 9 weeks of adversity. So can you dive in a little bit into just how that whole experience was, where you were at mentally? Because obviously there had to have been a lot of fear, not knowing what in the heck was going to happen to you, not really understanding why you were being held hostage, right? Nothing, I would imagine, nothing made sense. And you were probably caught in trying to make sense of the things, right? So where were you at mentally during those 9 weeks? How was it at the beginning, in the middle, towards the end? Just again, I want you to dive into your mindset during those 9 weeks.
Yep. The floor and the foundation of my life had been ripped out from underneath me dramatically and instantaneously, something like I had never experienced before. And I was held for the first 27 days in solitary confinement in a cell with no window. It was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the concrete floor as a bed. The only human interaction I had was for a few seconds in the morning and evening when the guards brought bread and boiled potatoes and water. And I never stopped caring about dying or the long list of other bad things that I thought might happen. But I began to lose the energy to be afraid. Fear is an emotion, and it takes energy to generate that emotion. And I was so exhausted that I was even struggling to generate an emotion of fear. But in that cell, I found strength in a range of ways. For example, I leaned on skills and traits that I developed from traveling to different corners of the world, which provoked gratitude for just the basic food and water I was being given. As I mentioned, I leaned on skills and traits that I developed from being a competitive athlete, that mental toughness, critical thinking, resilience. How often have we had a boss or a coach tell us, control what you can control? I leaned on a belief that I had a purpose in life and a desire to see family and friends again. And when I really boiled it down, I found strength in 3 key ways. The first, number one, was potentially a bit paradoxical, was to lean into gratitude. The second was to, as I mentioned, control the things that I could control. And the third was to recognize the uncertainty of this situation as an opportunity for growth. And those 3 initiatives or elements, I found a lot of strength. I will say, though, nothing was more important than my faith, which a lifelong Catholic, and I view the world through a spiritual lens, and found a lot of strength through that as well. So I found myself leaning on all kinds of different things. And I felt like I needed all of my life experiences, all the strength from all of them at once in order to push through and survive that.
Man, what a fascinating, again, when you think about the 3 different things that you had mentioned there. The first one, for you to step into gratitude. It's such a place of uncertainty, not really understanding what in the heck's going on here. Am I going to live? Am I not? And you spoke on the fear aspect. So was it like right away? Like, I know I have to be grateful right now. What was that like for you?
Oh, no, it was not right away. It took me some time to get to that point. It took, after several days of pacing back and forth, I finally stopped. I said, hang on a second. Wait, maybe there's some good in this situation. Maybe there's some positivity here, something to be grateful for. And to that, an inner voice replied and said, Sam, are you crazy? you've just been taken hostage. There's nothing good here. There's nothing to be grateful for. The best this will ever be is a period of your life you can forget. Well, I fought that inner voice and I said, hang on, I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for my health, my education. I'm grateful for the basic food and water I was being given. I actually said to myself, Jake, I remember saying, I'm grateful for the air that I'm breathing, and that the guard who just delivered me a boiled potato smiled at me for 1 second. These things may sound elementary or insignificant, but I found that each one of these small expressions of gratitude became this silent rebellion against the uncertainty of the situation. So perhaps a bit, as I said, paradoxically, I found strength by leaning into gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I love that so much because again, how often do people get caught in the tension, the uncertainty in their own lives, whether that be relational, right, with an intimate partner or with their job, their career, uncertain if they're going to last another week. And so many people get caught in the storm, get caught in the web of negative thinking around their situation. And I'd never like to compare one person's situation to another person's. But again, here you are having no idea where your life is going to head, right? You have no idea. Again, you're in a foreign country in the Middle East where there's a lot of tension. There's like consistent tension over there. And here you are now as a hostage, as a prisoner. And the fact that you're able to lean into gratitude, that to me is just like the ultimate sign of not just mental strength, but mental stamina, right? You've had many moments in your life where you had to exemplify mental strength, but here you are now as a hostage. And I think it took a lot of mental stamina for you to get through that experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And as I said, it took me time to get to that point. And I was leaning on a lot of these other experiences that you're talking about, a lot that came from being a competitive athlete, overcoming the adversity of a coach. It sounds strange to compare these two things, but I remember being in that cell and sometimes thinking, this coach was really hard on me when I was 12. And if I can get through that, well, that can help me now. And maybe it only helped me for 2 seconds, but I was leaning on all of these things throughout my life in that situation.
For sure. And then you had also mentioned your faith. And I love that you brought that up because I'm newly a man of faith. I have met God. I am trying to walk with God, trying to walk with Jesus. I've been a Christian now for the past 5-6 months. I got baptized and everything. So when I heard that, I'm just like, man, I love that so much because I would imagine that had to have been like your biggest pillar or your biggest crutch, maybe, in getting through this and understanding that everything is purposeful, right? You were experiencing extreme levels of adversity, but you still had the faith. And perhaps without that, maybe you're still there, or maybe it extends longer than 9 weeks. So what exactly was that process like for you when it comes to your faith? Was it a conversation that you were having out loud? Was it all mental? I would imagine there had to have been a lot of prayer taking place during that experience. So again, when it comes to faith, can you bring it all full circle on exactly what that was like for you?
Everything had been taken from me, my material possessions, my communication, my freedom. But no matter what, I knew that my faith was absolute. And I didn't need a phone or permission from the guards to talk to God. My prayers became, as you were kind of hinting at, this uninterrupted conversation with God. I was constantly talking to him, pacing back and forth, saying things out loud. Even though they told me not to talk, I said, God, I'm here, I'm listening. What are you trying to tell me today? What can I learn today? What are perhaps the positives about my situation today? And my number one prayer was always, God, please keep my situation safe and peaceful. Please keep me physically unharmed. And my second prayer was then about the timeline. So if this was all going to end peacefully, then the next question was when? And this was the prayer that for me became the most tricky and intense. And I remember almost positioning it as like a business deal. I said, God, I know you have a plan, but is it possible? Would you consider an adjustment to the timeline? Can that work with your plan?
Yeah.
And then I finished all of my prayers. I'm Catholic, so I would say the rosary and dedicate each decade to something different. I prayed for my family, my friends, anybody who I thought might be working to get me out of that situation. I prayed for world peace. I also prayed very hard for the courage to forgive my captors. And through that, I discovered that I was working to forgive people who weren't even sorry. And that's strength. Found that forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a choice. And ultimately, through my prayers in that cell, I discovered that we're never less alone than when we're totally alone with God.
Mm. Can you say that one more time?
We're never less alone than when we're totally alone with God.
Yeah. Yeah. And what an incredible opportunity. Again, such adversity, but such an intimate time in your life to be intimate with God, right? You're praying, whether that be mentally or out loud, right? And what strength it took. Was there any type of fear when it came to speaking out loud, knowing what you had been told? Oh, if I do this, maybe this is going to happen. Was there any fear there before the first time you spoke a voice?
There was. And through all of these prayers and all of these emotions, it was a roller coaster and it was never straightforward. But I was wondering what might happen if I do this. What's going to be the consequence? But I just continued to move forward.
Yeah. Was there any level of acceptance that you might potentially die through this experience?
Every day in neighboring cells, I would hear the sounds of inmates being beaten and tortured. And of course, I couldn't help but wonder when's my turn. I realized that I was in this environment where nothing was off limits. So I thought quite a bit that I would be killed. And interestingly, I got to a point where I found comfort in death. And what I realized was that there's some comfort in it because you talk about being raw and vulnerable on this podcast, right? So there's some comfort in it because not a single person has ever managed to conquer it. And I got to a point where I actually became okay with that being the result of this.
Wow. That is so powerful, man, because again, I've never been on the brink of potential death. There's not a lot of people in the world that have, right? And the fact that you did and you lived it for 9 straight weeks. Was there any type of harm done to you physically, obviously emotionally and mentally? I know, just even if nobody spoke to you, to be there for that long, it's a mental battle, right? You were being provided with food, so I would imagine you weren't starving then, right? But yeah, can you dive into that?
I was never physically harmed. And I don't know exactly why. Maybe my citizenship or passport saved me a little bit. They were unsure what to do. But solitary confinement itself is torture. It's a captivity tactic that's been used by cruel captors for centuries. So I was emotionally and psychologically tortured on that front. And also, the most challenging part about the entire situation, particularly the first month in solitary confinement, was the uncertainty of the situation. So sometimes I say to friends, I'll say, if I told you, like Jake, I'll say to you, if I told you that you were going to go and sit in a dungeon on the other side of the world for 27 days, you're going to be given bread and boiled potatoes and water. You're going to hear people being tortured, but you're not going to be tortured. And on day 27, you're going to be out. Now, I'm not saying you'd be comfortable, but what I'm saying is that it's a totally different situation than not knowing that finish line. And so the uncertainty of the situation was what became the most challenging. And based on the information I had, I believed that all of these potential outcomes were on the table. So was I going to be released in 5 minutes? Well, based on the information I had, I thought that was possible. Was I going to be in that cell forever? I thought that was possible. Was I going to be released in a week? Were they going to torture me or starve me or shoot me? Based on the information I had, I believed all of these outcomes were possible. And trying to entertain them 24/7 was emotionally and psychologically exhausting.
Yeah, for sure. And for anybody that understands and knows about the mind body connection, you weren't being physically harmed, but through the emotional and the mental abuse that was taking place, it has an impact on our bodies, right? We don't feel the thoughts, right? We feel them in our bodies somewhere.
You know how if somebody, let's say you're walking through a door at your house and somebody stands on the other side of it, and as you walk through, they jump out and they try to scare you, right? And you have that heightened hyper emotion, that kind of increase in emotion for like a couple seconds, right? I felt like I had that level sustained for a month, and it became exhausting on my body. As you were kind of talking about that connection, it was exhausting to generate those emotions at a sustained level for that period of time.
Well, for sure. And you're trying to combat the negativity that was creeping into your mind, undoubtedly, the fear, right? And for anybody that's never been in a situation like this, how often do we as humans, perhaps it's a person that never works out, physically never works out, but somehow they find themselves physically exhausted, and it's because they're going through a mental battle, trying to stop negative thoughts, replace them with positive thoughts. That's emotionally exhausting in time, which again then is going to lead to you feeling physically tired.
It may sound weird, but I think there are a lot of parallels there with what you just said, like different situations, but there's some overlap there on the Venn diagram for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, okay, so obviously, well, real quick, like you had mentioned, if I were to be placed in that situation and I knew that after day 27 I was getting out, what that provides is, like you said, a certain level of comfort.
It's a finish line.
Yeah, there's light. There's light at the end of the tunnel, right? Mm-hmm. But for you, it was never there.
By the way, I've had people, sorry to interrupt, I've had people say to me, that actually sounds pretty good. 27 days, nobody bothering me. It's quiet. I'll eat the bread. And I say, if I know I'm getting out in 27 days, so like that actually, like kind of sign me up type, like kind of jokingly, but like almost to the point where they're saying, you know what, no distractions, no kids, no boss yelling, like these things. And so I've almost had people say like, that actually sounds like a positive thing.
Well, what these people don't understand is now you're in a cell, in a dungeon, and it's completely dark. You have no distractions. So when your energy shifts, when your emotions come to the surface, there's nothing to distract you from you. So it's just you against you. So these people that are speaking that, I think, are very naive at what took place at a spiritual, like you were going through a spiritual battle right there. Your faith in God was being tested every second of every day, right? And so again, the stamina, your love for God right now, I would imagine, is at a level that you maybe never thought possible that you could possibly get to. But again, now when we're taking a broader view now, okay, we know 9 weeks. At what point during the 9 weeks did you ever learn that, okay, maybe conversations were beginning to be had that, okay, I might be able to get out? Did you ever know about these conversations, if there was? But again, when it comes to you being set free, did you ever know when it was coming, if it was potentially going to happen?
One of the most overwhelming things for me when I was released was learning about everything that happened on the outside while I was trapped on the inside. And I didn't know about any of these things while I was being held. So everything I learned afterwards. And it turns out that my family was working very hard on this, and a lot of this is in the book, because there are really two stories here. There's what's happening to me and what's happening with my family, and they were working with the U.S. government and lots of officials and agencies, but were struggling to be super effective because of a lack of diplomatic ties between the two countries. And it turns out that my sister's college roommate actually had a connection to some officials in Lebanon who were able to mediate my release with their counterparts in Damascus. And that was what led to me being released.
Wow. Talking about everything having purpose. Wherever your sister went to college, she was clearly meant to be there. God put her there to create this connection for you.
I think so. And when I reflect back on that situation and how things played out, there's really only one explanation that makes any sense. I believe it was. There's only one explanation that makes any sense to me.
Yeah.
So I think you're right.
And heck, maybe your sister, before she was choosing to go to this school, she had interest in other ones, right? But again, God said, I need you here. You're not going to understand it now, but in 7 years or in 8 years, whatever, you're going to have a better understanding, because who knows, maybe without that connection, again, maybe that 9 weeks is pushed to 12 or 15, whatever, right?
Yep.
Oh, brother, some powerful stuff here. And again, now I know what you're doing. And before we get into what you're currently doing with the public speaking, from a mental and emotional, I would imagine to a certain degree there might have been some PTSD. Even though, again, you weren't physically harmed, to be held hostage for 9 weeks, not knowing, did you experience any PTSD or any deep pain once you were released?
Yep. Well, particularly in the early days when I came home, there were times when I'd be going to sleep at night. And if I mentally found myself kind of back in these situations, that became a bit of a challenge to overcome. And thankfully, I was just surrounded by really great people and was able to have been able to deal with that. But what was most challenging was when I reflect on my captivity, there were these times where there were like forks in the road where I feel like I could have gone this way or this way, with how I was being handled or moved. And I would reflect on, oh, what if I would have gone the other way, or what if I would have gone this way? And those were the times when I felt some of that PTSD. But thankfully, that's been relatively mild. And I feel, just so grateful to say I feel very healthy today. But those were the main issues. And I just think that we're all stronger and more resilient than we can imagine. And uncertain times are exactly what we need in order to grow. I sometimes talk about and maybe you think of things in a similar way, but I sometimes talk about what I characterize as the sine curve of life. And if anyone remembers trigonometry from high school, the sine curve was this never ending up and down radio wave. And at the top of the curve, when things are going well, it's important to have humility and awareness and gratitude. But I don't know that anything deeply good emerges from the top. It's always at the bottom of the curve where all the growth happens. And this was a situation for me where rock bottom taught me things that a mountaintop never could.
Yeah. And was there any level of self-sabotaging thoughts, like, if I would have just not been trying to travel the world, this doesn't happen? Was there any thoughts of hating yourself, criticizing yourself for being in this position that you're in?
There was just a little bit of that. There were a couple times where I thought, gosh, maybe I could have done this differently or that differently, or why did I do this? But I just realized very quickly that didn't do me any good. It just got me nowhere. And so thankfully it didn't last very long, but there was just a little bit of that.
Yeah, it certainly got you nowhere and actually took you even further from the faith that you needed to get yourself through that experience.
I think you're right. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. What a powerful thing. So obviously it sounds like you're doing a lot better now. It's been 5 years, right, since these experiences, right? And then now here you are, you're out public speaking. You wrote a book. What was the process like for the book? And was there any pain in writing the book and having to obviously remember these experiences?
Maybe I would say it was actually more therapeutic than anything, and putting things out there. But on one hand, I think it's an unforgettable story that includes a travel journey to every country in the world, heads of state, high stakes diplomacy, celebrities. But on the other hand, and I think more importantly, it's about what we all learn through this experience that we believe can be helpful to others. It's about how we can all turn our own challenges and adversities into to assets and opportunities. And I hope that this book equips readers to adopt a similar mindset and a similar approach and implement it into their own personal, professional, and spiritual lives.
Absolutely. And man, just so incredible. And again, like I've mentioned a couple times, now you're on you're doing a lot of public speaking. When it comes to the public speaking that you're currently doing, did you know going into this experience that you wanted to get into public speaking? Or was it this situation, these 9 weeks, that you're like, fuck, now I want to get out there and I want to help people to overcome their own situations? So if that was the case, if there was no prior thought of, I want to be a public speaker, then can you recall the 9 weeks and understand the purpose there now? And now you're doing things that without this 9 weeks, you would not be public speaking now.
Yeah, I had no plans to do public or professional speaking before this. And I don't feel so much survivor's guilt as I feel what I would characterize as survivor's responsibility. I don't want to be known for the things that happen to me. I want to be known for the way I've responded to them. And that's where a lot of my message has come from. My presentations are narrative driven and include all of the dramatic elements of my stories, but also weave in and conclude with key principles that I think we can all implement into our life. And essentially, I was pushed to a point of overwhelming uncertainty, truly life or death. But through that, I learned some things that have helped me, and some things that I think can help all of us when we're facing our own brands or breeds of uncertainty.
For sure. And
it's funny, like, sorry, you hear these sometimes you hear speakers say things like, for example, they'll be like, climbing Mount Everest is exactly like selling life insurance. And it's like, okay, well, it's not exactly like that. And I try to be careful with that, because I'm not saying that anything is exactly like it. But what I am saying is that the same recipe or responses can be relevant and can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So how soon after then these experiences, how soon after those did you get into the public speaking?
It took me a little bit of time to reflect and put things into context. I gave my first presentation like 7 or 8 months later, and it sucked. It was bad. I mean, like, I look back on the presentation now and it was like, oh my gosh, things could have been a lot better. But it was really helpful to just start, put something in place. And I've built off that presentation ever since. I've now been speaking full time for 4 years. I've given about 130 keynotes across a range of organizations, mostly corporate work, conferences and conventions. And my primary theme is uncertainty, how we embrace and manage uncertainty. So that was how that kind of came to be, and never could have really expected where life was going to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I myself, I've done some public speaking, certainly not the amount that you have done. But before I started doing it, I was working with a public speaking coach.
Yeah.
Did you have something like that as well, or did you just dive in?
So I have a speaking coach. The first presentation I did, I put it together myself, and then was connected with a coach after that, and have been working with him for the past few years, and has been an incredibly important part of my journey and in growing my business. So certainly recommend that.
Yeah, for sure. So is he just purely a public speaking coach, or is he kind of like a life coach, mentor? What's that like?
He speaks himself. He's a professional speaker himself, but also does speaking coaching and executive coaching too. So in that space.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. One thing just came to mind that I wanted to speak on immediately after you mentioning it, but you had talked about the highs and the lows in life, and how it's nice to have the highs, of course, but there's not as much learning experience that takes place at the highs. You had mentioned that hitting rock bottom, and it's in the lows where the most growth takes place. And I myself, I feel the same way, that in order to become filled with more light and be connected and closer to God, you have to start embracing the darkness, the setbacks, the slumps, and realize that those two are serving that purpose, and there's growth for us. But would you agree that so many people, when they start feeling the tension, the lows, the darkness, they find ways to suppress and distract themselves from it?
If we're all honest with ourselves, I think we will say that our personality today, the very essence of our life, is a result of the challenges we've faced and the choices we made as a result of those challenges, not because of the good times that we've had. We could be held hostage by anything: alcohol, drugs, illness, relationships, injuries, finances. But the way that we embrace and manage those challenges, the actions we take, I think that defines who we become and from where we begin again.
Yeah. And one thing you had mentioned earlier that we are so much more powerful and resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And would you agree then that so many people never get to tap into their resiliency because when the struggles come, they find a way to run away from it, right?
To break down. Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of people who hear my story, who hear the story and say, like, this guy is an idiot and never should have tried to go to every country, never should have been in Syria in the first place. And on the other hand, there are a lot of people who say this guy is a hero for surviving. And the truth is, I'm neither of those extremes. I became part of an extraordinary circumstance and just did my best to embrace and manage it. And what I've learned to be true, to answer your question, is that we can't always choose the exact path that we take in life, but we can always choose. We can always choose the way in which we walk it.
Amen to that, brother. That right there is super powerful. Now being, 4 years, 5 years removed from those experiences, when you reflect back now, is there anything that you would change in terms of how you handled the whole situation?
Yeah, people ask me quite a bit, Sam, if you could go back, would you still travel the way you did or still go on this trip? And on one hand, I would never want to relive captivity and wouldn't wish that on anybody. But on the other hand, and I think more importantly, I would also never want to give up everything that's come from it. The opportunity to meet some remarkable people, to grow in character and in faith and an understanding of the stuff in life that actually matters. And those two things go together, which makes your question challenging for me to answer.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, the way you handled it was the way you were supposed to handle it, right? The experience was always going to be, and again, just a true test of faith, a true test of your mindset. And again, here you are now, you're a hostage. And you said you had to rely on the skills that you learned through sport, through being an elite level athlete. So again, here we are now, we're in a completely different experience outside of sports. But now we get to step in, and you talked about gratitude. Now you get provided you with an opportunity to increase your gratitude through such uncertainty. And that gratitude just goes right back to hockey and being an elite level athlete, So
it's all connected.
It's all connected. And that's the most beautiful thing. One cannot be the thing without the other thing, right? Man, just so insanely powerful. And I'm obviously very happy for you that there was no physical harm directly done to you. So now what's the message? When you go and you do these different events, public speaking, obviously I know you had talked about those three things, the gratitude. You'll have to remind me on what the other two are. But again, what exactly is it that you're trying to get out to people so that they leave your speaking engagements with some takeaways? And if there is, what are those takeaways that you want to send out?
Uncertainty is a horrible thing to waste. As an athlete, entrepreneur, traveler, hostage, I will tell you there's value and opportunity in every experience. And when we lean into gratitude, when we take action and control what we can control, and when we recognize our challenges as opportunities, we win and we grow through uncertain times.
Yeah, man. Another question things keep coming up for me. So I love that you're still willing to engage and share. When it comes to your faith and when it comes to the conversations you had with God and you had with Jesus, was there ever anger? Like, why me? Why are you putting me through this situation? And if so, how long did that last?
It was a roller coaster. And as I would be moved from one place to the next, I would often think, really? Is this really what's next? I thought I was getting out of here. Is this really what's happening? So that became a source of a lot of tension. But as I mentioned, I view the world through a spiritual lens, and I believe I was given this for a reason, and that's what I'm working to continue to uncover today.
Yeah, I love that, brother, because I don't know if you know anything about my story in terms of the childhood trauma that I experienced. And I now through the work that I got to do to heal myself from those experiences, I wouldn't change them. If I could live my life over, I would still include that as a part of my journey, because now the purpose behind it, right, is set this up. Without those experiences, maybe I'm not hosting a podcast. So how could I then not be grateful for what I experienced and turn it into a blessing?
Without the experiences I've had, I'm not a guest on your podcast, most likely.
Yeah,
So,
exactly that. All right. Well, what about from here? From here on out, what is the path hopeful? What do you want your path to be like? Do you want to, speak for the rest of your life? Do you want to write another book? What's the future hold for Sam Goodwin?
right now, I love my speaking business. I think it's the best job in the world, and I feel so fortunate to be able to do it. And from a spiritual standpoint, I feel like I'm exactly where God wants me to be right now, which is there's no better feeling. So right now, that's what I'm focused on. I have the book that just came out. So between those two things, that's where a lot of my professional time is. And I don't know what the future looks like further down the road, but right now, that's what I'm focused on.
Love that. Love that, brother. I know that a man with purpose is a dangerous man, not dangerous in terms of violence and hurting other people, but when a man knows why he's here and understands what his path is, that to me is a man that is unstoppable. I would feel you're pretty unstoppable right now. Again, when you reflect on what you've been through, and here you are, like a speaking engagement, speaking in front of 1,000 people. Come on, man, that's nothing.
Well, I think we both got a lot of that in us, that purpose, and so much of that truly comes from a life as a competitive athlete, which is just it's really fantastic to reflect on, in my opinion.
Yeah. The listeners and myself included, we've heard a lot about your story, a lot about, the pain, the suffering, the gratitude, obviously, that you experienced during those 9 weeks. But I know that I myself and the listeners would love to know, what it was like when you got released. Was it a simple thing? Was it complicated? What had to be done? Can you kind of just take us through that whole process? And I'll follow up with another question after.
On July 26th, 2019, one of the prison officials came to the cell I was in, called my name, and he indicated that I was being moved. And as he escorted me outside, he stopped and he said, "Sam, you're very lucky. President Assad has agreed to release you." This sounds encouraging, but I had been lied to so many times in the past 2 months that I had essentially become immune to believing anything like this. But outside, I stepped into a black SUV, which turned out to be part of a 5-vehicle convoy that raced out of Damascus at what seemed to be 100 miles an hour. We didn't stop at traffic lights. We used the shoulder of the road to maneuver around traffic. We drove west towards the mountains, and nobody in the vehicle said a word. The nice cars, the professional nature of the operation made me think that this was all either really good or really bad. I'm about to experience one extreme of the captivity spectrum here, but I don't know which one it is. And we came up to a checkpoint, one that seemed to be some kind of significant border. And as we passed through, the officer in the vehicle sitting next to me, he kind of subtly tapped me on the leg, and he said, "Sam, you're in Lebanon. You're safe now." And this was also very encouraging. I was still putting all the pieces together, though. And we drove from there for about another hour into Beirut, the capital city of Lebanon. And I was taken to the Office of Lebanese Internal Security, kind of like the equivalent of the FBI here in the US. And when I walked into the office, in addition to dozens of government and military intelligence officials and journalists, my parents were there, culminating this moment that was indescribably emotional, one that many people thought would never happen, and frankly, a breathtaking display of God answering prayers.
Wow, man, that is so powerful. When they were transferring you from your cell to the vehicle, was it just grab you by both arms, rush you to the car? Did they put anything over your head? I know in movies, in these types of situations, that's what the viewer sees, is they put something over their head so that you have no idea of where you're going. Was it like that?
It wasn't like that in this case. It was actually all peaceful. At the same time, I didn't have a choice on where I was going. But if I would have resisted or caused any kind of trouble, then I think something like that could have happened. But it was all peaceful in that moment.
Yeah, and then what was the feeling that you were experiencing while you were in the vehicle up until the moment where you got tapped on your leg and told, kind of where you're at?
I was on eggshells. It was overwhelmingly uncertain. I had no idea what was going to happen. And I thought all of these potential options were on the table, from being taken to a firing squad to being released and anything in between. And that uncertainty was overwhelming.
And then you walk into the building wherever you were, and then you see your parents. Talk about that feeling. You said undescribable emotions. Of course, was it instant tears? Was it like holy jumping? Thank you God, I made it.
I sometimes say that if this story were to ever be adopted for something on screen, like maybe a movie, nothing that happened in that moment would need to be dramatized. It could be played out exactly the way it was. It was as dramatic as anything that I've ever seen in a movie. We could essentially just take the security camera footage from inside Lebanon's general security and just play it on the screen. That was how it felt.
Wow, man, so powerful, so powerful. And I know, again, the listeners, myself included, are obviously grateful you're here to tell the story, but grateful to know kind of that was a peaceful process in getting released. Prior to that moment, I know we've obviously talked about the 9 weeks that you were in. In regards to those 9 weeks, was there any communication that you had at any points? Were you ever allowed to make a phone call or anything? Like, was that an option for you, or was it just silence for 9 weeks?
I wasn't able to make a phone call or have any official diplomatic visits, anything like that. There were a couple moments where I was able to unofficially smuggle out some communication with the help of some of the other inmates, and a lot of those details are in the book. But I was able to get some very small, brief communication out through the help of these strangers. But it wasn't very much, and it didn't really do much to give me any information. So the short answer is no. I was entirely cut off from everything, and frankly, I felt the way that they wanted me to feel. I was utterly cut off from any control of my life.
Wow, man, that is fascinating, powerful, all just so real and raw. Another thing that comes to mind, it just came to me. I know you're a man of God. I would imagine you've read the Bible at least once, couple times, maybe more, who knows. And I know there's a lot of reference in the Bible about fasting. I know you were given, boiled potatoes, but you were probably in a fasted state quite often, right? And I know for myself, I've experienced a lot with extended fasts, and I know what happens to my thinking when I'm in an extended fast. 3, 4, 5, 6 days is the longest I've gone. And I know that when I'm in that, my mind, my thoughts, the thought patterns, everything slows down. So can you recall your experiences? Again, I know you were being given food. Maybe some days I don't want to eat this frickin' boiled potato again. So were you ever kind of in that fasted state? And if you were, do you recognize in those moments what was happening to you mentally?
Perhaps a little bit. I think the fasting falls for me this larger category of sometimes when we're suffering, we're being brought closer to God. And one of the other biblical things that I reflect on now is that I found myself praying quite a bit to Saint Anthony, because Saint Anthony is the patron saint of lost things. And I felt very lost at that point, and that I needed to be found. So that's one of the things that comes to mind when I think about your question.
Yeah, okay. And then again, another question in regards to your faith. Going through what you've gone through, would you say that your faith in God, your trust in God, your belief in God has again just strengthened through your experiences?
It's gotten stronger. And when I reflect on my life, I realize that God has been there for me every single time, whether it's a dramatic situation like this or something small in our everyday lives. And that perspective I found to be very meaningful.
Wow, brother, that is powerful in itself, because for myself, in regards to the childhood trauma that I experienced and going through things that is very unfortunate that I wish nobody had to experience, through the healing I've done on myself, I now realize that it was God that put me in those situations, those experiences to give me a blessing to now be able to do this. If I didn't experience what I did, maybe I'm not hosting a podcast, And so I think it's all too easy for us, men of God, women of God, brothers and sisters in Christ, right, to only reflect on God in the good moments, right? And think that it's only God when it's good and it's not God when it's bad. But, it's God on either side of that.
I think that's well said.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm new, I'm reading the Bible. We could dive into that another time, but yeah, again, brother, just incredibly powerful, incredibly raw, vulnerable. I appreciate your willingness to come on and share as you have. And for any of the listeners that are still listening, you've mentioned a book, obviously, many times. I have as well. What is the title of the book, and then how can people purchase it if they'd like to?
Thanks, Jake. It's been my pleasure to be part of this. The book's called Saving Sam, and it's available everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. Publishers Hachette. And if anyone would like to reach out to me, I would love to hear from them. Feel free to do that. I'm on all the normal social media platforms and would be glad to hear from you.
For sure. And then another thing, again, I know we've mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, you're doing a lot of public speaking. For anybody that's listening, that's, in corporate America, owning businesses, whatnot, if they wanted to reach out to potentially have you come and speak, where would they do that? Is it social platforms? Do you have a website?
Yeah, thanks. Just through my contact form on my website. And I would love to be in touch. I speak full time. I run my own speaking business. I speak primarily on uncertainty. And essentially, I was pushed to a point of overwhelming uncertainty, truly life or death. But through that, I learned some things that helped me and some things that I think can help all of us when we're facing our own forms of uncertainty in our personal, professional, and spiritual lives.
For sure. And what is the website?
It's samrgoodwin.com.
Gotcha. GOODWIN for the listeners. One last question here before we get going. Obviously, you were held captive. You were in a foreign country, right? Everybody thought you were a spy. What type of advice would you give to anybody that feels as though they are, alone, lonely, held captive, but they're not in the situation? Maybe they're within, a dysfunctional family and they feel like they can't get out. It's family. I have to stay in. Again, everybody is going to, not everybody, but there's a lot of people in the world that do feel like they're alone, that do feel like they don't have any choice. What type of advice would you give for those people that mentally are experiencing maybe what you did, but physically we're in different places?
We could be held hostage by anything: alcohol, drugs, illness, relationships, injuries, finances. But the way that we embrace and manage those challenges, the actions we take, I think that defines who we become and from where we begin again. And I've learned that we're all, I think, stronger and more resilient than we can imagine. And those uncertain times are exactly what we need in order to grow.
Absolutely. And I think all too often when the uncertainty is there, it's very uncomfortable for people. And so they resist it and they push it away and they do anything and everything they can to distract themselves from themselves, right?
Right. And I think oftentimes if we view that uncertainty as an opportunity for growth, that becomes really powerful. As an athlete, entrepreneur, traveler, hostage, I'll just say that I've learned that there's value and opportunity in every experience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So perhaps the quote can be, grow through what you're going through.
Well said. I like that, Jake.
Alrighty, brother. Well, again, thank you so much. I know the listeners are going to gain a lot. And again, guys, it's samrgoodwin.com. If you want to reach out to him to, ask some questions, say thank you, whatever the case is, however his story touched you and you want to reach out, that's where you can find him. I think you can also find him on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn at just Sam Goodwin.
Yep.
Other than that, brother, again, thank you so much for your heart. You're an inspirational man, and I know that you're touching many more lives than you are even aware of. And so keep on keeping on, brother. You are loved beyond belief, and looking forward to what the future has for you.
It means a lot. Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay well, guys. And again, for all the listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the Raw, Authentic, and Vulnerable podcast with Jacob Newton. Stay well, everybody.
This is a sportsy media production, part of Quiet Loud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.